Herzlich willkommen zu Spurensuche Gurs, dem Videocast des Blauen Hauses. Das Blaue Haus ist älter als 300 Jahre und war mehr als 100 Jahre das Gemeindezentrum der jüdischen Gemeinde im Reiserland-Rhein. Seit 20 Jahren ist hier die Gedenk- und Bildungsstätte der Geschichte der Juden am Oberrhein zu finden. Wir wollen heute im Gespräch mit Dr. Pnina Rosenberg weitere 2 Geschichten von Horst Rosenthal kennenlernen und führen dieses Gespräch auf Englisch.
Today we have the great pleasure to have Dr. Pnina Rosenberg from Haifa in Israel with us, who's an art historian specializing in the art legacy of the Holocaust, focusing on visual art and graphic novels during and after World War II. During her doctoral research on visual art in French internment camps, she was the first scholar to unveil Horst Rosenthal's graphic novels done in Gurs. She has presented her pioneering research on Rosenthal's biography and his oeuvre in several books and articles and at international conferences. Rosenthal, who was born in 1915 in Breslau, Germany, now Wrocław in Poland, immigrated to France in 1933, hoping to find a future in the country of liberty, equality, fraternity. When World War II began, he was detained in several camps before becoming a prisoner in the Gurs internment camp. In 1942, he was deported to Auschwitz, from where he never returned. Welcome, Pnina, and thank you very much for sharing your knowledge with us about the graphic novels of Horst Rosenthal.
We have already presented Rosenthal's Mickey au Camp de Gurs in our first videocast, and now would like to have an introduction into his other 2 stories, Petit Guide à travers le Camp de Gurs, a small guide through Gurs camp, and La journée d'un hébergé, a day in the life of a resident, both created in 1942 in Gurs. Let's have a look into Petit Guide à travers le Camp de Gurs. This booklet, as well painted and written in 1942 by Horst Rosenthal, presents us the camp in the style of a mock tourist guide. On the second page, for example, we can see an elegant couple in the railway station looking at a poster which kind of invites them to come to Gurs, a renowned camp famous for its cookery, if you want to lose weight. Further information is available on all local police stations. Pnina, could you tell us a bit more about the irony of this illustration?
We see in this image a picture within a picture. We see a young couple, a couple in a rail station watching about and see a notice which is actually tempting them, or whoever reads it, to come to Gurs as a spa or something like this. Okay, actually it's an allusion to a May 1914 notice that with the German invasion of the Netherlands and Belgium, refugees of German origin had been summoned by posters that appeared all over France to report to designated place from which they were transported to various camps, as happened to Rosenthal himself. Those posters summoned all German and foreigner of German origin, aged 17 to 65, to present themselves as the designated assembly center. Failure to do so would lead to imprisonment. Thus, this xenophobic and intimidating government notice and its consequent internment was ironically transformed into a polite and tempting invitation to spend an agreeable time in this resort. So it certainly creates some kind of irony. We see all over this booklet that there is a contradiction between image and text, which creates irony. Here it is increased with a painting within a painting, in which we see the poster within the poster, and actually it shows us two things. On one hand, the text talks about the marvels of this place, of this supposedly space in which you can lose weight, etc. On the other hand, you see a very gloomy image of a man trotting in a footpath and a very unattractive barracks. So we see the contradiction as we look at it. And then we see another thing. We see two people, a man and a woman, looking at the image. Actually, this is the couple that hold the suitcases and read the notice are not vacationers, but they are immigrants who are following the summons, and I'm quoting from the text, from the notice published in May 23rd, 1914, that foreigners, all those foreigners mentioned above, those of German origin from the Saar and from Danzig, at their expense, take the railway, here we have the couple at the railway station, or any other means of public transport to reach the assigned assembling center. Their baggage should not be over 30 kilos. So what we actually see here is if we make the juxtaposition of the two images, is before and after. We see the couple who's about to be Gurs inmate as they seen as ordinary citizens, but normally dressed, etc. I mean, there is nothing shameful or negligent about their appearance. And then we see what happens to them, to those people, once they are becoming Gurs inmates. They lose all their individual traits. They are quite dehumanized, and from a semblance of normal citizens, they become inmates, deprived of dignity and freedom of movement, symbolized by the waiting inmates struggling to move. Then we come to the Book of Hours, which makes the whole Book of Hours as a journal written by a young Berger. And we see that it is not only he is not the only one who is the protagonist, but he makes the whole staff around him, I mean the director of the hotel, the camp, etc., as part of accommodating hotel personnel who takes care of him. So actually it's a very twisted situation, which becomes very ironic, and it also based on two other artistic devices that Rosenthal uses. It starts like a fairy tale. Once upon a time, there was a petit berger. He had no position, not even a head of the barracks. Do you want to know what the petit berger did all day? If you do, then turn the page. So actually, that's how we start a fairy tale. As the fairy tale is a very structured genre, it should, there are rules, it should have a happy ending. And then not only a happy ending, it shows that the world is morally structured. I mean, the bad one is punished, the good one is rewarded. Whatever happens aside is another thing, but this a very specific rule that should apply to the fairy tale. So once we start to read it, we are expecting this kind of event to happen, but we know it doesn't. Or now when we read it, but he misleads it to have based it on this. And then it is also a Book of Hours, which as we know, Book of Hours is a medieval Christian prayer book which structures the day very rigidly, and actually it's more or less has the same pattern. I mean, if you are a good believer and you do all the other things and you don't sin it, well, you'll have a happy end. I mean, your life will be rewarded, etc. So we have two very structured models upon which he constructs this graphic novel, which none of them, of course, does any good to him eventually, because there is no happy ending, and the structure maybe assists him to spend this chaotic time, but no more, no less, because it has nothing, it doesn't have any any spiritual assistance as a book of hours should enable him to have, or the happy ending, etc. that we are expecting. And it comes to it after depicting the daily life. In which describes the ordinary life in the camp from early morning to night, as we have it, in the Book of Hours. Comes a time he puts the narrator puts the little resident to bed. Mm-hmm. And in this episode, Rosenthal, utilizing the wide range of meaning of the word héberger, and expands the metaphor to the inmates, to the hotel guest. Thus, the Gurs camp turns into a hotel where the sole desire of the entire management is to fulfill the client's every needs. And it goes like this. Young man, it's time to go to bed. Sleep, petite héberger, sleep. Sweet dreams, dreams of coming liberation. Okay, this is a dream all inmates had, and we saw it very visually in the first, in Mickey, when he erases himself in order to be liberated. Dream of eating your fill. Of course, we have seen in this graphic novel and the other we have seen the problem of the lack of food and what it causes. But before you fall asleep, do not forget to thank in your prayers the Honorable Minister of Interior who sent you here. And actually, all those camps were under the Ministry of the Interior.
Rosenthal pointed out this irony that was already created by the ministry itself.
Yeah, as I said, instead of the Holy Trinity, which we find in the Book of Horst, the prayer books, we see a Gurs version of it, and instead of the Holy Trinity, these are replaced by the Ministry of Interior, by the camp director and the camp, all nominated by the French administration. Thus, he gives an ironic twist to the original evening prayer. And by constructing the booklet on two registers, the fairy tale and the Book of Hours, sometimes mixing them together in this same episode, he creates actually a multi-layered text image, a technique that serves him well to present in a very subtle and sophisticated way his criticism against all those who created this oppressing regime, and those who suffered were actually the Germans who fled from Germany and hoped to find refuge in France. I mean, actually they had the same enemy, if you want to think of it. So the irony is much more intensified than it could have been if they wouldn't have been of German origin. Yeah.
So, Pnina, you're talking about the many different ways in which the humor in the art helped the prisoners to survive or to sustain in the camp?
So, for instance, when he's looking, Mickey looks with a magnifying glass at his food and, puts a lot of humor in it. It enables him a bit to overcome, momentarily, imaginatively, but that's the role of imagination. Humor and imagination actually enables us to try to confront and live it in another register, in a register of not of the real reality, but in the wishful reality. And it gives you some momentary relief of overcoming this situation.
Pnina, I have one last question to you. What was your first contact? How did you and when did you find Horst Rosenthal's work?
It was somewhere in late 80s or early 90s in the archive of the Mémorial de la Shoah. At the time it was called the Centre de Documentation Juive Contemporaine. And they had and still have, of course, it's increased, a huge archive. And I was sitting with one of the ladies was in charge of the Madame Imoun. If she hears us, I bless her and I thank her. And we were looking at things in files, and then hold on. And then I saw those colorful images. I said, what is it? And then she put it out, and then she said, I have another one. So I discovered those small booklets, which were fascinating, and said, we know very little about him. So if you find something about the artist, it will be very important for us as well.
So thank you very much for your work and the insight into Horst Rosenthal's paintings and stories. Thank you, Pnina, for being here.
Thank you. I'm thanking you. It's a pleasure cooperating with you, and I'm always pleased to talk to correspond, to exchange ideas with people who share the same interest, which is always, yeah.
So thank you. We'll continue somehow.
Yeah. Thank you so much.